Hello and welcome to the Silverwind. My name is Captain Tom. I am joined by a very special and unique host. His name is Wilson. He's here every week. He's an intergalactic robot, and you will not have to suffer his opinions. So, let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to do today. We are going to be talking about the First World War. No, I don't mean 1914. I'm going to be talking about Genesis 14. So this is a pretty big chapter in the story so far. So we'll break all of that down. And in the meantime, we are first, before we do any of that, going to go to a moon called Rhea. And this is a very unique moon. So yeah, let's go ahead and basically go over there and we'll figure all that out. In the meantime, once we set the course, we'll look at those chats. So let's go ahead. Let's make sure we get there right. Like the nice little jingle there, Wilson. Nice touch. That should get us there. Let's see. Hopefully. All right, once again, this is Saturn, so we're not going to jump there. We're going to phase there. So that's the easiest way to do it without Wilson running into, you know, fragile rings and that sort of thing. Let's see. All right. That should be it. Okay, lock ourselves in place. Turn that music down, and yeah, so here we are. So P Johnson, here we go. Julian, hey, just some guy, let's go. Absolutely love the energy, guys. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about this little world right here, this moon orbiting Saturn. So some interesting things about it. Wrote some stuff down so I make sure I cover everything. So let me grab that real quick. And yeah, so Rhea, let's talk about this. This is the second largest moon orbiting around Saturn. So, of course, Titan would be the largest moon. And then, interesting thing about it, so the Cassian spacecraft, I think it's the right way to say it, Cassian or Cassini. So it orbited Saturn, got some really good detailed information of Saturn itself, the moons, had instruments to kind of see if, measure like the volume of these moons and stuff, or the density to figure out if they were mostly ice or mostly rock. Things like that. So basically all this information, you can find it on the a typical NASA.gov website. So it's some pretty cool stuff. And with this one in particular, we've covered some of the other moons before, and they were like pure ice. Well, this one is about 25% rock, but it's called the dirty Snowball. And the reason for that is that all the rock is not at the core like you would typically think of with any of these moons that have rock in them. Typically, the core is all rock, and all the water or the ice sits on top of that. So with this, the dirt is kind of just distributed throughout it, because even though it's 25% rock, it doesn't behave like a moon that would have a heavy core to it. So if that makes sense. So they've determined that it couldn't possibly all be at the core of it. So it's basically just a bunch of ice with a whole lot of rock just kind of scattered throughout it, right? So literally a dirty snowball. So that's pretty interesting and unique in and of itself, but it also has these canyons on it. And you can kind of see, if you look really closely, there's these fissures, these fractures all over this moon. And in reality, they're basically these canyon walls. And so when the ice kind of falls off of the side of them, it gets really bright and makes it easy to see them. And so the best that they can figure out what's caused this is that it had some kind of what's the best way to say it? I'm about to say tidal, and that's not correct. Tectonic plate movements. There we go. So basically, these are like fault lines. So these would be old tectonic plates that had moved at one point in time, and obviously wouldn't be moving anymore because tectonic plates require moving on a liquid surface, right? So that the core would have to be hot, and it's it's cold through and through as far as they can determine. And so yeah, let's see here. Another thing that's interesting about this is a very unique little moon right here. It has an exosphere. So if something has some atmosphere, but it's not a lot, they call it an exosphere. And this has oxygen and carbon dioxide for just a thin layer of it around its surface. Now, That's pretty interesting. Oxygen and carbon dioxide. I mean, it's speculated that maybe the oxygen comes from the water decomposing, and maybe not. It doesn't happen to all moons apparently, but it's happening to this one and has some oxygen. But then, wouldn't that be oxygen and hydrogen? Like, why is there carbon dioxide around this moon? They have no idea, right? They can detect it, but they have no idea why it's there. So, pretty interesting mystery right there. And then another really unique thing about this is that you can't see it right here because it's very thin and we're kind of level with where it would be anyways, but it actually has a small ring around the moon. It's the only moon that's been discovered with a ring. So it's, yeah, I mean, of all the moons that we've covered so far, that's a lot of really weird stuff going on with this one right here. So Rhea, so what are some things that we could talk about this? Well, real quick, I think it's all chat here. I'm your biggest fan. Aw, thanks, Addie Rose. Appreciate that. Very cool. So let's talk about this moon real quick. So if we were going to go from the materialist perspective, right? So when you read through like the NASA article that I was reading, getting a lot of this information from, they just kind of cover all this stuff like, yeah, there's a mystery there, there's a mystery there. Like the first one would be, so if this is supposed to be 4 billion years old, right? So basically you have something like maybe a snowball effect. You have some ice here, some rock there, kind of rolling around in the universe, collecting all these materials, and then eventually starts orbiting around Saturn. Well, if that was the case, at some point in time, for there to be tectonic plate movements, the core would have to be hot, right? The core would have to be liquid of some kind for those plates to shift around on top of. So how is it that all that rock wouldn't have condensed down in the liquid, water and that sort of thing, condensed down to the core and formed a core of rock? It's not really adding up there. So it doesn't seem that it's possible to be a dirty snowball and there's tectonic plate, activity that we could observe on it. The other interesting thing is that carbon dioxide. To just say it's a mystery, science will figure it out one day, is kind of a call to blind faith, right? A blind faith in the materialistic scientific process. So it's there's a lot of very difficult questions to answer with this moon if you take a materialist perspective. So what about the non-materialist perspective, the theological perspective, the idea that this wasn't just some random accident over 4 billion years, that some kind of creator designed all of these things and put this into place, and maybe put it there 4 billion years ago, maybe put it there 6,000 years ago. Regardless, it's a very easy explanation at that point because it's unique and it's just made that way. So yeah, it's once again, all of the things that a lot of scientists thought we would find out in space, they run into all these crazy mysteries where things don't really add up from that materialist perspective. So anyways, just thought I'd share that with you guys. We'll have this as our background as we cover Genesis 14, and should be pretty wild. So let's go ahead and hit that transition, Wilson, and I'll see you guys over in the reading room. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this. So we're actually, instead of just reading it, I'm going to set the scene because chapter 14 starts off with a very big word salad. It's basically going to be talking about all these different nations coming together and forming alliances and going to war with one another. So to fully understand that, I'll try and break it down. I got a fun little map to show you guys, and we'll kind of work out the details of that. And then after explaining it all, then I'll read it, and I'll read it in full. And I think you'll be able to understand what's being read a lot easier if I do that. So before I do that, let's go ahead and review real quick. We are still talking about Abram. We'll be talking about him for a little bit. So we've covered in chapter 12, Abram, following God's call to go to a strange land, and to leave his father's family to go there. He does bring his father, and he does bring Lot. His father dies along the way. Lot actually has a conflict with him in the next chapter. Basically their two households aren't getting along together. So Abram basically allows Lot to pick and choose where he would like to take his side of the family to. And so Lot goes to Sodom, which looks like the really it looks a lot more appealing to go in that direction. The land looks a lot more beautiful and everything like that. So Lot, even though he is a righteous man, he's not necessarily the most wise man. And so he chooses to take up residence in a location that's well known for being an ungodly place. So they are in the land of the Canaanites, the people that God had cursed from earlier on in the story, because he knew all the bad things that they would eventually get up to. And yeah, so we'll kind of see a little bit of some of the drama going on in this area in this chapter right here. Last chapter, we ended with Abram being in a pretty good place with God, and God reconfirmed his covenant with Abram, basically telling him, I'm going to make a great nation from you, and all this land will belong to you. Even though you let Lot take that land over there, all of this land is yours, right? You didn't lose any of it to Lot. So it's, yeah, so we'll have to see what happens after that. Okay, so let's go ahead. I have here a fun little map. Make sure. So here are Abram's travels so far. All right, so we've got, so basically came from the area of you can see on the right side of the map, and he traveled all the way over to, you know, where we see Hebron, and that's about where we left off last time. I think the name of the exact, well, we'll get the name of the exact place in the story here in a second, but basically the Dead Sea is an important part of this map to remember. So he's basically around the left side of the Dead Sea here, and yeah, just kind of hanging out and waiting for that fulfillment of God's promise. So let's see, let's go ahead and go to this right here. So I'm going to set this up because then this map is going to make sense in just a second. The orange highlights are going to be all one side, and the purple highlights are going to be the other. And so basically what's going on here is that the old Hittite kingdom up there, they basically made vassal states out of these five, basically these city-states down around the Dead Sea, so where that little purple highlight is at. So these city-states, for whatever reason, we don't know how that went down or why. They're not directly connected to the Hittite kingdom, but they were paying basically, not tithe, but tribute. They were paying tribute to them, and they were vassal states to the Hittite kingdom. Well, these five city-states decided that they weren't going to do that anymore, and they decided that they were going to establish their own independence from this, and the name of these places was Sodom, Gomorrah, Zeboim, Admah, and Zoar. So these are the five city-states that rebelled against the Hittite kingdom, and the king of the Hittite kingdom, his name is Chedorlaomer, and or Chedorlaomer. There we go. That might be a better way of saying it. He's referred to as being king of Elam, and he ruled the Jordan Valley. So with that, basically what happens is as soon as this little purple area on the map right here says, we don't want to pay tribute anymore, and we're going to make independence from you. Well, King Chedorlaomer, he basically calls on his allies over in Babylon, as you see to the right of that map, Sumer, and the Elamite kingdom, basically rallies a big army from all these major kingdom powers to march against these five city-states. So yeah, so that should help clear up a little bit. Here we go. Actually, you know what? There we go. Now you can see me again. Perfect. So that should help clear up a little bit what is going on as I read this part of the chapter here. So yeah, so we'll start off in verse 14. We'll go down a little ways and just kind of read the setup here. So let's go ahead and make that happen. All right, so Genesis chapter 14. About this time, war broke out in the region. King Amraphel of Babylon, King Arioch of Elasar, King Chedorlaomer of Elam, King Tidal of Goim fought against King Bera of Sodom, King Bersha of Gomorrah, King Sheba of Admah, King Sheber of Zeboim, and King Bela, also called Zoar. The second group of kings joined forces in the Siddim Valley, that is the valley of the Dead Sea. For 12 years, they had been subject to King Chedorlaomer. There we go. But in the 13th century, they rebelled against him. So basically kind of reviewing what we talked about. So on that map right here, this basically what it's saying is going on. Let's see here. Here we go. So just to the left of this, actually this might be better. Actually, it's about the same distance on these maps. So you see the Dead Sea right there. It's labeled. So this valley is to the left of it. So basically these 5 city-states decided that it would be a good idea to, as a show of force, rally their armies there and just basically declare their independence. To show that they are willing to defend themselves, and probably hoping that these, other kingdoms would just let them separate and nothing else would come of it. Well, that doesn't really work out. So it says that they're going to have this battle. But before this battle happens, it says there's this big conflict. Something happens before that. Now, this area at the time, and this is why I was talking about the First World War, for a lot of theologians and historians who take a look at this area at that time, this would have been about, I have this at 19th century BC. So most of the people on Earth at that time would probably be living in this area. And because of that, this conflict will wind up involving most people on the Earth, making it a literal world war. So it's a really big event. This is not a small excursion. So let's see what happens next. So we've got the 5 city-states, the rebels who've decided they're going to declare their independence, and these big kingdoms who are now going to muster an army to go fight them. So let's go from there and keep reading. All right, starting in verse 5. 1 year later, so this is after the 5 city-states declare their independence, Chedorlaomer and his allies arrived and defeated the Raphites at Ashertoth, Carneum, and the Zuites at Ham, the Emites at Shiva Carithaim, and the Horites at Mount Seir, as far as El Paran and the edges of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to in Mizpat, now called Kadesh, and conquered all the territory of the Amalekites and also the Amorites living in the Hazon Tamar. All right, another word salad, but basically what's happening here, what it's describing, is like, who were all these people? We didn't even talk about these people yet. Well, basically, if we go back to this map right here, check this out. So you've got a good amount of distance between where these kingdoms are and where these 5 city-states are. Now, the 5 city-states probably figured, because they weren't directly connected to these kingdoms, maybe they wouldn't go through the trouble of sending an army all that way. Once again, I don't know how they got in the situation of paying tribute in the first place, but this is the situation that they're in. Well, back then, in order to pay an army, you pretty much had to pillage along the way of where you were trying to go. And that's exactly what they do. They all rally their armies, and every single one of them start moving through all this territory between, these 5 city-states and them, and literally laying waste to everything. Pillaging, murdering, just running over everything in their path. All these people who aren't even involved in this conflict, and causing mass devastation across the world. So this would have been seen as a massive force of evil, of darkness, sweeping through the lands and basically committing, all kinds of terrible crimes against a bunch of people who weren't even involved with this. So yeah, this little rebellion has caused quite a stir in the world, and these armies are going in a zigzag motion. Like it referred there how they went back up. Like they're not even trying to take a direct line there. They're taking their time to go through and raid and destroy and mess up all kinds of different people groups. And it would also be a pretty big show of force of like, hey, you see these guys rebelling over here? You see these guys not paying their tribute? How about this? If anyone else gets out of line, this is what we're going to do. Like, one person messes up, you are all suffering. And so that's what they're doing here. Yeah, pretty intimidating thing. Pretty messed up, pretty evil. So yeah, it's let's see what happens next. So we're going to get into, now that we've got this setting set here, these 4 kingdoms bearing down with a substantially larger force against these 5 city-states. And let's see the outcome of that. All right, this is going to be in verse 8. Then the rebel king of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, also called Zoar, prepared for battle in the Valley of the Dead Sea. They fought against King Chedorlaomer of Elam, King Tidal of Goyim, King Amraphel of Babylonia, and King Aronach of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. As it happened, the Valley of the Dead Sea was filled with tar pits. And as the army of the kings of Sodom, well, actually, you know, we'll stop right there. We'll stop right there. All right, so now we're going to finally have this battle. They finally arrive. They're going to duke it out. And I do want to share something that's really interesting about these kingdoms. So these 4 major kingdoms have actually been linked to some modern kind of historical data, right? So let's go ahead and make these connections real quick. Chedorlaomer, and I think technically I should be pronouncing that with a K sound, is also named Kudur Legomer. This was someone in the Elamite Empire, right? So they actually made a connection with this character in history. The Sinar, the biblical word for that is Sumer, and so this would be the Sumerian Empire, aka would eventually be called the Babylonian Empire. So we're seeing the early formation of the Babylonian Empire here being involved with this. Elasar, these were the Mesopotamian kingdom of Larsa. And then the Goyim is referring to the Hittite Empire, which was based in modern Turkey, and it was a basically numerous tribes and peoples that lived there. And so they call, I think they make a reference of like a king of peoples, right? So there's many different peoples that live there. So that's basically the historical connections right there. And these 5 city-states do not have historical connections, at least nothing. They don't really have a big impact in the larger historical story, even though there have been excavations that maybe find some links to things like Sodom and Gomorrah and things like that. They're pretty sure they know where it's at. I think there's one location they've excavated. They're pretty sure they found Sodom and the destruction of that level of archaeology, which is pretty interesting. So that's going a little ahead of ourselves, but it's interesting that they were able to make the connections in here with like actual historical empires, and these little city-states are now going to have to war with them. So from this point on with it would be really nice if it gave us details of the whole battle and how the whole thing went down. But now it's going to actually just focus on Sodom and Gomorrah, because that's what's relevant to the story. Because if you remember from last chapter and what we talked about earlier, Lot moved into the area of Sodom. And that's why this entire thing is relevant in the story of the Bible right now. And so it's basically going to focus on the very specific outcome of Sodom and Gomorrah in this battle. But their fate is generally assumed that all 5 city-states suffered the same fate. So let's jump into that. All right, let's see here. Verse 10, as it happened, the Valley of the Dead Sea was filled with tar pits, and as the army of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into the tar pits, while the rest escaped into the mountains. That's such a gruesome scene. The victorious invaders then plundered Sodom and Gomorrah and headed for home, taking with them all the spoils of war and the food supplies. They also captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom, and carried off everything he owned. But one of Lot's men escaped and reported everything to Abram the Hebrew, who was living near the oak grove belonging to Mamre the Amorite. Mamre and his relative Eshcol and Aner were Abram's allies. All right, so we tied this story back to Abram here. So the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fail epically, and it's this really gruesome description of just like how there were tar pits everywhere, and as they're fleeing, the people are falling into the tar pits. It is just it's a very dark day in general. And Sodom and Gomorrah are not necessarily, they're not rebelling because they're, righteous people themselves. It's really just, bad people fighting against bad people, for the most part, is what we're looking at here in history. So Lot's been captured. But one escapes. Someone in Lot's household is able to tell Abram. So let's see what Abram's going to do. We basically have World War I going down, massive destruction across the entire known world at that time where most people are living. And now Abram is going to have to make a decision here on what he's going to do about this overwhelmingly strong force. Now, as you could probably safely assume that after raiding through half the world and the known world, and then basically having this big fight with the 5 city-states, that maybe the armies have suffered some casualties and that sort of thing. But the idea here is that they're a very powerful force. That if Abram is going to challenge them, it would very much be the first David and Goliath kind of story in the Bible, right? Because Abram is not going to be someone who has a huge military. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's see what Abram decides to do about his nephew Lot being captured. All right. When Abram heard that his nephew Lot had been captured, he mobilized the 318 trained men who had been born into his household. Then he pursued Chedorlaomer's army until he caught up with them at Dan. There he divided his men and attacked during the night. Chedorlaomer's army fled, but Abram chased them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. Abram recovered all the goods that had been taken, and he brought back his nephew Lot with his possessions and all the women and other captives. So a few interesting things here. So basically Abram takes, before the 300, where the 318 that in Abram's household. So he makes a strategic move to attack at night, splitting up his forces, probably making it seem like his forces were bigger than what they were, and ends up routing Chedorlaomer's this big world-ending army. He's routing them now. We have no idea how big his army is, but he ends up chasing them. I got some details of these locations here. So to go from Sodom to about where Dan would be was about 200 miles. So they've basically taken Lot 200 miles from where he had gone, or where he had been at when he was captured at the battle. And then from Dan to Hobah was another 170 miles. So this big battle between Abram and this world power took place over a 170-mile stretch of land, basically chasing them down in full retreat. There would be no explanation for his success here other than that God was with Abram. That'd be the only real explanation for how he was able to do this amazing military feat, which would also make him really famous. Now, keep in mind, Chedorlaomer and all of his allies have basically ravaged the whole world. They've made a lot of people angry. They've destroyed a lot of people's lives. And Abram is the one who sends them packing, who ends up defeating that army and essentially kind of winning the day, right? Basically saves all these people who were captured, takes all the things. And it makes an interesting note here. It says that he was able to recover all the women in Lot's household. So where were all the men? Likely the men were killed, right? So it just kind of alludes to the brutality of these Hittites and these big kingdoms as they came in and thrashed these small city-states. So we got a nice little victory there, but it's not over yet. Now we're going to get into one of the, I would say, one of the most, what do you say, mysterious characters in the whole Bible. So it's pretty cool stuff. We'll jump right into it here. It's a man called Melchizedek. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so this is in verse 17. After Abram returned from his victory over Chedorlaomer and all his allies, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem and a priest of God Most High, brought Abram some bread and wine. Melchizedek blessed Abraham with this blessing: Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you. One more here. Then Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the goods he had recovered. There we go. So yes, let's talk about Melchizedek here. So here's a few interesting facts, Melchizedek. So he has no past. We have no idea where he comes from. He has no future. We have no idea whatever happens to him or anything like that. He is a priest of the Most High and a king, so that makes him a priest king. So this priest king doesn't have a beginning or an end. and has the power and authority to bless Abram. This comes up later in the story, well into the New Testament. And also there's some inferences in Psalms as well, talking about Melchizedek in relationship to the coming Messiah that would one day crush the serpent, right? With all that said, there's a little bit more here. He's also the king of Salem. Now, Salem is the original name of the place that is called Jerusalem, right? Which becomes a very important city, a city of kings, of godly kings. Psalm 110, speaking of Psalm 110 verse 4 talks about the Messiah is from the priesthood of Melchizedek. All right, in Hebrews 7:3, let me complete this and I'll go back to that. It says that made like the Son of God, a priest continually, when referring to Melchizedek. So it's this is a very interesting character. This is a big mystery at the time if you're just looking at Old Testament writings. Who is this guy? Because not only is he able to bless Abram, which means that he's greater than Abram to be able to pass on that blessing, that he has the authority to do that. One of the arguments in the New Testament is that, and it's kind of an argument to the Jewish people who don't regard Jesus Christ as the Messiah. The argument is that, well, Jesus is he's under the priesthood of Melchizedek, which is a greater priesthood than the Levites. And it's why he's basically able to establish a different priesthood and doesn't have to follow the Levitical priesthood. Because if Melchizedek was able to bless Abram and the Levites come from the line of Abram, that means Melchizedek is greater than that priesthood, right? So with that said, the really interesting thing here is that Melchizedek is also blessing God himself. I'll read that again because that's really, really wild here. And blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you. So a lot of people believe, taking the whole story into account, and I think this is a pretty accurate way of looking at it, is that Melchizedek is this basically figure who is as a pre-incarnation of the Son of God, right? We've come across this figure several times in the Old Testament already. We come across this figure who is speaking to Adam and Eve in the garden, even though that no one has seen the Father, right? No one has seen God, and yet we see God talking to him. We also see, other instances of God kind of showing up and having these really personal interactions, and we're going to continue to see that. There's even an instance later where God literally wrestles with Jacob, and then but it's not God in his entirety, right? The idea is that these are pre-incarnations of Christ, which would be, the Son of God, which is the persona of God that is basically able to be in our presence in that pure humility without, us dying and that sort of thing, right? And it's God the Father that no one has seen and couldn't stand in their presence. So we're already seeing these allusions to basically the stuff that the New Testament talks about all the way here in Genesis. So it's very interesting. There's a lot of different ideas about it, but that's one of the big ones. And I think it's worthy of pointing out that this could very well be the Son of God kind of showing up in the story. And then, because who would have the authority to bless God other than God himself, right? So it would have to have some kind of connection like that. So there's one more part to this story, because now the king of Sodom's going to come in. So we've got this priest king, this really holy, righteous man, giving this blessing to Abram, and then we get the other side of the coin, so to speak. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, starting at verse 21. The king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give back my people who were captured, but you may keep for yourself all the goods you have recovered." Abram replied to the king of Sodom, "I solemnly swear to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take so much as a single thread or sandal thong from what belongs to you. Otherwise you might say, I am the one who made Abram rich. I will accept only what my young warriors have already eaten, and I request that you give a fair share of the goods to my allies Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre." And that's pretty much the story of Genesis 14. So Sodom, who's not a good guy, does not run a good city state, let's just say, a good culture and group of people. He basically represents evil on the other side of this kind of interaction here. And Abram is very quick and very wise to recognize that and say, listen, I don't want to be enriched by you in any way, shape, or form. Sure, I have a right to these goods and these treasures and things that I won, but they're yours. You can have them. You can keep them. I never want it to be said that anything that I was able to do in life, whatever, came from you, right? So he's completely disassociating himself with ungodly people in this way, and associate himself with godly people like Melchizedek here. So yeah. And that's basically another win for Abram on that one. So far he's had a lot more wins than losses, and now he's like a world war hero. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Honestly, when I've read over this stuff in the past, it's just like, oh, there was a battle and that's fine. No, this was a huge battle, and it was a very big deal that he would do this. So he would command a lot of respect and a lot of renown for having accomplished such a great feat as this. And yeah, so let's probably going to go ahead and go back to the front of the ship here. If you guys have any questions on that story or Rhea or anything like that, guys can go ahead and type those in the chat, or it's after the live show, you can do it after that as well. So you're Dan Yoder, great lesson, Captain Tom, thank you, appreciate that. So let's go ahead and go on to the front here. Where's that transition scene, Wilson? All right, we turned around here and we're going to go ahead and go back. So let's make sure that we could do that correctly. Here we go. Let's hit, we're going back to Earth. Don't want to crash into it. All right. Think that'll work. Will that work? All right, easy day. So yeah. Gotta let the sound, it's so loud. There it is. All right. It's beautiful out here, guys. It's beautiful out here. Okay, so let's lock ourselves in place. Plummeting to Earth would be bad for everyone. So yeah, so that is basically, I know we're kind of like, Genesis is going to be a long book to go through, but I think taking a slow pace like this is really helpful for getting those kind of details that would be easy to miss, and just reading, well, there was a battle and he won a battle, so what? No, it's a really big deal, very important to the story overall, and especially that character Melchizedek. Don't forget that character. It comes up in really key parts in the rest of the story. I think the most reasonable interpretation is that this is the Son of God, showing up in the story, and we're going to continually see that happening. One of the things that Jesus did very interestingly, obviously we're going to have a long ways to get there, but he would talk about how the scriptures would talk about him, and there are some moments in the Gospels when it's talking about when he's interacting with people, he's pointing out scripture to them and saying, like, yes, this is where I'm at here, like all of it is about me and it's talking about me, like I'm a main character in this. So I don't want to miss out on that in light of the whole story when that kind of stuff happens. So a priest king without any beginning or end that can bless both Abram and God himself, yeah, that's got to be a divine character for sure. So with that, I think I got the same song as last time, so we'll go ahead and end with that one. I appreciate you guys showing up like you do. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, but also the biggest thing is just sharing it. I'll definitely get to a good place. I think I have a good idea on how to edit these things and just get the story out there in a posted video, which I think will get a little bit more traction, that sort of thing. I think it'll be better for just in general on YouTube. I think with its algorithm, live shows are a little weird, but yeah, with that, anyways, I want to always make sure I do these live things so that if you guys ever have any questions, we can kind of have that interaction and work through the stuff together if we get through anything that's a little too crazy. But with that, appreciate you guys, and I will catch you guys next time. See you later.
It's almost like falling in love for the first time, all over again. Hold on tight to the feeling, but it's a roller coaster in my head. So I'm holding myself on a precipice, and I've been dreaming off the ground. So I'm looking for something that's definite. I'm praying you don't let me down. It's gotta be all. It's gotta be all or nothing. All or nothing. Oh, it's gotta be all or nothing. All or nothing. It's gotta be all or nothing. It's gotta be all or nothing. Oh, or nothing at all. Hold these doubts like the playing cards close to my chest. Turn them round for the river and hope it's something that I won't regret. So I'm holding myself on a precipice, and I've been dreaming off the ground. So I'm looking for something that's definite. I'm praying you don't let me down. It's gotta be all. It's gotta be all or nothing. All or nothing. Oh, it's gotta be all.